Full Contact. In association with Mitsubishi Motors, drive your ambition.
Hello and welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph and Mitsubishi Motors. England needed a last-minute try and extra time to see off an inexperienced French side at Twickenham on Sunday, and they lifted the inaugural Autumn Nations Cup. Despite this being the second trophy of the year, head coach Eddie Jones says we are still to see the best of his side, and he's called on them to embrace the pressure of being favourites as he switches focus onto the Six Nations next year. We'll be discussing England's successful year and looking at how the squad is looking ahead of the 2021 Six Nations. Elsewhere, Ireland ended their first year under Andy Farrell with a comfortable win over Scotland in Dublin. Farrell described Ireland's campaign afterwards as work in progress, and we'll be speaking with the former Ireland scrum half, Eoin Reddan, to get his take on Farrell's first year in charge and what needs to be done to bridge the gap between England, and France actually, ahead of the Six Nations. We'll also assess the impact both Scotland and Wales could have on that tournament. The Welsh head coach, Wayne Pivac, insists that his side are heading in the right direction after what's frankly been a bit of a year to forget for Welsh rugby. And we'll be taking a closer look at some of the work being done at grassroots level during the last 7 months as parts of the Mitsubishi Volunteer Recognition Programme. Alongside me today, Maggie Alphonshi. Hello, Maggie.
Hello, Brian. How are you?
I'm all right. Didn't quite go as most people thought it would do. It's England's second trophy, dramatic circumstances. What did you make of the game?
Well, first I thought it was a good game to watch. A great advert for the tournament, considering all the games beforehand hadn't been as exciting as everyone keeps saying. But it was great to see the game go to sudden death. I think if we're talking about both England and France as individual teams, you'd probably say England again didn't have their best performance. They managed to come back, so showed resilience and character. The French, we obviously said that they weren't going to show up because they're an inexperienced side, and they definitely showed up. I personally think that the game ran out of their hands. Like they let that game go, but others will say the referee had a part to play. But overall, I thought it was a good game to watch.
Well, the referee did have a part to play, but they were unfortunate in that sense. However, they were lucky on this occasion that Eoin Farrell, who's normally very reliable, had an off day, because had he kicked the points when they were on offer, France wouldn't have got that lead. And it's a very different story to defend a lead with the hope it gives you, and to constantly be chasing games and so on. I never thought that the French side would play badly. I mean, you're definitely too young for this, but I remember playing in a probables possibles England final trial, and these always went like this. The probables side hardly ever won, because the possibles side just said, "Sod it, let's have a go. Doesn't matter. What have we got to lose? I'm not necessarily in." And the other side was thinking, "Don't make any mistakes." And quite often they just didn't get to the rhythm. And I think part of it was partly that, but also whatever plan B, C, or whatever is, if you don't get your tactics right, and to me it's not the amount of kicking, it's a quality. And people get this wrong. When a kick goes a long way and you make loads of touch, when you get man and ball and you get a turnover or a penalty, people don't say, "Oh, you've kicked it again," because it's happened. If it goes wrong and it's too long, or it gives, or it goes out on the full, then people say, "Oh, it's boring." Well, that's intellectually dishonest. You either criticise the kick itself, irrespective of what it is, or you don't. And the fact is, they just weren't kicking and chasing well.
Do you know what? I think there's been a lot of talk about the whole kicking throughout the whole tournament. And, I know Eddie's talked about it in previous interviews. End of the day, they've got to do what they've got to do to win. You play rugby. If you're a professional player, you play rugby, as you know, you play rugby to win the games. And entertaining the fans is sort of, part of it, yes, but you've got to win the games, and we'd probably be criticising if they weren't winning the games. So I think you're right about the quality of the kick. That's what we should be judging rather than the amount of times they kick. But at the same time, they do what they need to do to win, because I know what I'd be like in their position. I just want to win. I don't care how it's done, just as long as we win.
Well, funnily enough, and Brian Habana, was a great stat from Brian Habana on Sunday, and he said the win over New Zealand which everyone agrees is one of England's, if not the best, but one of the best performances you've ever seen from an England side. In that game, they kicked the ball 2 times less than the average per game that they do. That's all. But no one remembers that. I mean, it was a great game, they scored good tries and so on. So that's the point I'm making about this. Of course, it's accentuated when you think, oh, God, another kick gone badly. But people aren't honest about this. They don't analyse it in the right way. What do you reckon about Tom Curry? He's been chosen as player of the tournament. Impressed?
Do you know what? As a fellow flanker,
yes,
I think he's been brilliant. And I also would have put Toji up there. I thought Toji had been consistent throughout the tournament. You know, he probably was put under a lot of pressure, yesterday, especially in the line out. But, you know, I thought Curry's been brilliant. I thought Underhill had a really good game last weekend. I think yesterday he pretty much got tested. But yeah, I've just been impressed with the England back row as a whole. Obviously, Vinopola got player of the match yesterday. The back row for England, you know, they've got depth now. I mean, Eddie's got a lot of players to choose from, and there's players like Sam Simmons, who potentially could be in that England squad as well. You know, Jack Willis is performing. So England's got a healthy back row, and I thought Curry stood out, Underhill stood out, Vinopola, especially in the last game, did. And then, you know, I would have looked at Toji as well, who I thought had a good tournament.
I wrote about this, and Eddie Jones talked about it, about accepting the mantle of favourites. And, you know, everyone, when they're not favourites, everyone says, oh, it doesn't matter. But we've seen, time after time, the Celtic sides, on the way up, do really well when they've got to world number 1 or near there or in big games, and they're supposed to win. They haven't done, and they've done that consistently. And I know, you know, it is a factor. New Zealand have dealt with this for decades, and mostly, you know, brilliantly. Jones has talked about the need to accept that. Well, how do you go about that?
You know what, Brian, you know, it's hard. Having a tag as being a favourite is really challenging. And I have to admit, I've always admired the underdog, you know, mindset, you know, especially when you, for example, for me, I look at Wales, like the Wales men's team in particular, they've always had that mindset, you know, if we're the underdog, we're going to come out and absolutely show what we're capable of. And teams like France, again, like we saw yesterday, they literally embraced the underdog tag. And to become a favourite and to maintain a favourite is really hard. And I guess games like yesterday will only help England. It will only help them grow, help those young players in particular who's, you know, not used to, I guess, having the pressure of always being the favourite and then all of a sudden, you know, being put under pressure. So I think it's every game like that which they get challenged will only help them grow and help them, you know, develop. And you think about it, like you said, New Zealand have had that favourite tag for a long time. They've managed to cope. And I remember I listened to an interview, I think it was Aaron Smith, and he talked about, you know, the games that he remembers are the ones that he's lost. And the ones that he's lost, he's framed his shirt, because actually it's important to recognise what it feels like to lose. So I guess being a favourite is hard, but you have to, I guess, learn to embrace it. Difficult though.
I'll tell you a couple of things for me. You've got to set your own standards, not the opposition, however, and maintain those wherever possible, and be hard on yourself when you don't. But also, and I mean this in the right way, not a Priti Patel way, you've got to be, if you bully a side, you've got to enjoy it. You've got your foot on the throat, give them a good kicking, you know, score the tries, take delight in that. Don't feel sorry for people. It's a sporting contest. They're grown adults just like you are, you know. And I think in the right sort of way, that mentality, you know, helps you to accept that. Let's just have a quick word on France. What's obvious is they've got some depth, haven't they?
Got a lot of depth. I mean, isn't it funny how before that game, everyone, including myself, was all saying, oh, you know, England have got all this experience, got all these caps. I mean, we always talk about caps, so I never really, sometimes for me, caps doesn't mean anything. It's actually the mindset of a player on the day. You know, we were really obviously saying France weren't going to make it, and the depth of those players stood up. I think the French, if anything, you probably say the future for them is looking really good, regardless of certain players not being available. I think they could be a real strong contender.
Yeah, and you know the really, well, depressing if you're English or anyone else, fact is that in Fabien Galtier and as Rafa as well, Ibanez, they've got two really sound blokes and sensible. You know, they're not the mad hair flick Laportes and these sort of people and even people like Villepro, who was a maverick. These are hard-headed people who are good players. They're very down to earth, and they might actually, maintain a modicum of decorum at selection, which has always been France's problem. And look, they're in a home World Cup. The more Northern Hemisphere challenges are, the better.
Hey, do you know what? I just think France have got one of the best defence coaches out there.
And yes, I was going to go on to that, but you brought it up, yep.
Sean Edwards, I mean, look what he's done to that team. Their defence, as you know, Brian, on the try line, you've literally got to put your body on the line. And to keep England out a few times after some really serious attempts from the England boys, I was so impressed. It was worthy. It was worthy of because I thought it might be the difference, because a goal line stand prevented England going in, etc. And it was worthy, if you're romantic, of a winning the game. You could have written it that way, and they were just unfortunate in that. I think they got the rub of the decisions went against them, but this happens in games. It's happened against England, but no one seems to mention that. But, it's the way it goes. Everyone's going off about the referee. What are your thoughts? Do you think the referee...
Look, in a game with laws like rugby union, you can pull apart a breakdown decision in many ways, and it's been proven, not in rugby circumstances, that two people can look at the same set of footage and come to completely different conclusions perfectly honestly. It's been done in crime and all sorts, policing and all sorts of stuff, and they both because they are approaching the subject with their context, their biases, their preferences. And it's just the same. If you don't support England, you will be looking for something to go against them, and vice versa. And that's what I said when I commentate. I've now learned to say, don't think about who scored, just look at exactly what's happened. And I said to people who accuse you of being biased, you say, look, when that went over, did you jump in the air? Because I didn't. And this is the point, because if you want your strike, you will look for positivity. And look, no one complains when it happens in their favour.
I totally agree with you. Look, I try and watch a game from a real, in the middle sort of view, very objective. And actually, there were a couple of calls where you kind of go, oh, I think France were unlucky. But England would have had a few the same way as well. Like you said, it depends what side of the fence people want to sit on. And we'll see what they want to see. So I can't lie to you. There were some calls I think, I probably wouldn't have made that if I was in that referee's position. But, everyone's got their own standard view, and some people don't want England to win. That's quite clear, as you see on social media, and others sort of go, England.
Well, I don't mind them. They can not want England to win, and nor should they if they're fans of the body. I just want them to acknowledge that they're not neutrals when they're assessing this. That's all. Time now to discuss Ireland's win over Scotland. Our guest is Eoin Reddan, the former Ireland scrum half, who's joining us now. Hello, Eoin.
Hi, Brian. How are you doing?
I'm all right, mate. Caelan Doris said it was Ireland's best performance of the year. Was it?
I think they've been doing well, week to week. There's probably some good bits in their attack, and Caelan Doris played very well himself. I think the media have been quite harsh on them over here, Brian, the last few weeks. I think, Eddie Jones has been quite vociferous about how good defences have become. And I think that's a fair comment, and it's so rare that we congratulate or acknowledge some of the work that's been done defensively around this Autumn Nations Cup. So I think overall the weekend, their defence, Ireland's defence was probably a good bit off what it had been in previous weeks. They had made some huge strides actually this autumn in their defence. They probably stepped back a bit, but their attack was pretty good. And they kept good discipline. Set piece was pretty good, and they probably did the things that are really important to win a game right now. On the whole, over the autumn, they probably stepped forward a good bit, but I'd say they were probably looking for a bit more yesterday or on Saturday, to be honest.
With regards to, the Autumn Nations Cup, Andy Farrell's brought in some obviously younger players and some new caps. What do you think Andy would have learned about the squad going forward?
Yeah, I think that he's probably realised that there's probably not, a huge difference between, a lot of players. I think there is a lot of depth there in terms of, not people. like not a huge drop off. I think we've a bigger pool to pick from for sure that can play at that level. Probably uncovered one or two, like James Lowe. I think is someone who can not just fill in but really push things on a little bit. I think each of the teams have players like that in them, and certainly that's going to be a find for Ireland going forward. I think it's from half they've got some good options now. Like I think both Conor Murray and Jamison Gibson Park are real threats and can add value at that level now going into the Six Nations, and there'll be real competition there. We've two out halves who played instead of Johnny Sexton, who both did fine. I think it's hard to judge them really because they didn't get enough time due to injury. But again, I think it's probably healthy. Again, the media over here are pretty harsh on a big gap between Johnny and the rest. But I think all three are probably good enough players for international level. So I think on the whole he'll be happy. I think our set piece wasn't very good over the course of the autumn. Scrum was better than line out. I think if we can, there are things that if we can fix, you might see Ireland bounce back a bit pretty quickly. There's a lot of other things right in the game, I think.
You mentioned Johnny Sexton. I was going to bring him up anyway. 38 he'll be at the next World Cup. What do you do with him? Because there are pros and cons for retention and rejection. What would you do?
So I think, if you ever played till you're 38, and Johnny won't mind me saying this, but when you play till you're 38 and you're still playing, to me, like I played for Leinster till I was 36 or whatever, and I think looking back, sometimes it says more about the competition than you. I think someone needs, if you're 36, 37 and you're still first choice and no one has come along in 12 years to actually take your place and actually put you under pressure, I think, that's probably the issue. I don't think it's, for me, what I want to see is the next player, taking this bull by the horns, and finding a way to get their heads right or their mentality right, that they actually, there's no question, and that they firmly try and take over. I think asking, particularly, any player, but particularly Johnny, to somehow, give this up or hand it over, or that's just things that, if you think of Delalio, Johnson, Wilkinson, these people don't do that. These positions have to be taken. Like Johnny took it when he took it, and that's what has to happen. When you've got someone that strong playing that well for that long, it's never a handover in my view. It's always taken from them. I think the Ronan O'Gara and Johnny Sexton situation, if you think of it, was exactly the same. Johnny took that spot. Ronan didn't reduce his competitiveness or somehow take a back foot. So I think what you're really looking for is pressure on the opposition to step up and take it. And if they're good enough, they'll do it. And if they're not, you just keep going. It's very hard to manufacture and deliberately kind of move someone off. Someone else needs to come up and make that easy for you.
Well, you just talked about obviously Sexton there, 38, which is really impressive to keep going. In terms of the Ireland squad, though, leaders, I think that's the question I want to ask you. James Ryan obviously had a stint at captaincy. Do you think Ireland got any other players who can step up to that leadership role, obviously who are young and coming through?
I do, yeah. I think Gary Ringrose was an exceptional leader as well. I think it's a difficult one. I think as a player you're looking for. Ireland have a lot of smart players with extremely good values that would be great captains in terms of work ethic and just living the right way, I think, which has become really important in rugby. Like New Zealand has been talking about it for years, about better All Blacks to make better players. And I think there was a lot of the way the system is in Ireland, it's very streamlined. What's expected of you as a professional is very obvious early on, and it gets the most out of a lot of people. So I'm not surprised that there are a lot of leaders who could lead on that level. What you're looking for, at international level and going to World Cups is probably someone who can lead like that, but also, lead physically in big games. And, I think James Ryan is probably the obvious example there where he can do that, where he can, he can think and call a line out, but he can, make the right call, kicking the touch or kicking a goal. But then he can stand up physically and impose himself in the opposition as well. And I think that's important. And I think there are other players. I think, CJ Stander is someone who obviously being from South Africa, it probably makes it harder for him given, that he hasn't been in the country as long, and, does he understand how where everybody's coming from all the time, and makes it a little bit more challenging for him to be as effective in the role, but maybe he can get there. There's no reason why he couldn't. I think Caelan Doris is someone who's stepping up recently as well. I haven't played with him, so I'm not aware of, how he is week to week. But I think there are a number of players, and there's probably people I'm missing out who are of the right age group, who have the right behaviours, who know the rest of the team would never feel like they're asking anything more than they would give themselves, and who can be motivational. I think when I think of the great captains, I think they can swing games and they can make big impacts when they're needed. Because sometimes talking is done, and it's time for action. And I think James Ryan is a good choice at the moment. I think Johnny still does that. I still think he has all the right behaviours, and he still stands up and puts in those shots that can turn a game with his choke tackles and things like that. So overall, I think they're in a good place, and it's a similar dilemma to the first one. You kind of want your captains, taking it, leading it, and not sitting back waiting to be told, it's your turn here. And I think hopefully Ireland are in a good space. I think they need a good Six Nations, where you'd see all those people I'm talking about in a different light by the end of the Six Nations, and see, is someone sticking their hand up to be a long-term, either helper to Johnny if he continues to be the best, or successor, if someone actually takes that spot from Johnny.
All right, that's all we've got time for. Thanks very much for your comments, mate.
No problem.
Maggie, let's just discuss Scotland and Wales. Gregor Townsend seemed pretty pleased despite their losses. Said they played some of the best rugby all year in that game, even though they lost. I mean, for me, I thought that Scotland had solved one problem, and that was a physical problem whereby they used to be fighting, literally, as lightweights, and I thought that they developed a pack that had stopped that, but they got bullied in the Autumn Nations Cup, and this shows there's a little crack there. So they need to sort that out. Backs, on good front football, very good. What do you think?
I thought against Ireland, they had an early lead in the sense of their attacking play. I was really impressed with some key players in that game. But you're right, something which I think that Scotland, you always say they've been known for having, a solid scrum. And I guess at times they got bullied quite a bit during the Nations Cup. For me, I think there's a few teams which feel like they're in transition. I don't know, like there's some teams where they're bringing in some other players, testing players out. They're still trying to, build that cohesion because they're obviously been with COVID. Teams not had the time together. And I feel like Scotland's one of those teams where you almost go, we haven't seen the best of them yet. Almost same with Ireland to an extent. I think Ireland had some transition of players coming through. Probably still haven't seen the best of them. So
Scotland have been like this for a while, though. You're constantly saying, look, kernel of a good side. If this goes well, if this develops, and then it seems to, then it goes back again, and and whatever. About time they needed. I think they need the stability domestically, and so on. I think they need to be more streamlined, like Ireland are there. As for Wales, I mean, look, it's been a disaster of a year. Wayne Pivac said they're heading in the right direction. I tell you what, the only thing that crumb of comfort I would take or give him is that there are several very good senior players that haven't been available, and apart from that, I haven't seen much. There was a spirited display against England in extremis, but I think Wales are one of the sides who they need the full complement. They just don't have. They've got talent, but they don't have enough of that. And I'm not just talking about doing a job. I'm talking about excelling, which is the place that England and France and the All Blacks and South Africa. That's where they are. That's the only crumb of comfort I can see from this year with Wales.
I think with Wales, I think what I'd love to see is more the senior players really stand up. it's been great to see some young players come through. I think there's a lot of pressure on Eoin Reddan as captain to continue to lead the troops. It's almost similar to when we talk about Johnny Sexton at Ireland. There's an over-reliance on Johnny, and I feel sometimes there's an over-reliance on Eoin Jones. And we're like, who are the next leaders coming through to take the mantle as captain? Who are the next young leaders in that team who are going to, give some direction? And you feel like Wales have sort of lost their way a little bit with that. Obviously, new head coach, but you just feel that's what they need to sort out. And against Georgia, they got their win, yes, and against Italy, they got their win. But really, I think they almost need to start thinking about the next crop of players coming through and who can take on that leadership role.
Maggie, talking about the Autumn Nations Cup as a concept, look, everybody realises it was rushed in circumstances that were completely preternatural. Lots of people were saying this is a time when you can just throw caution to wind. Let's entertain, let's show what rugby, let's have some fun because we're all miserable at home. And I think I think this is part of it. People have been stuck indoors saying, entertain me. And in normal times they'd be doing things and they'd have a more even temperament. They'd be saying, look, I just want to win. But sides have been very pragmatic, and it shows they've taken that side seriously. I understand both points of view, but what's your opinion?
Do you know what? The tournament has... I admire everyone who's made this tournament work, because to get all those teams together, like you said, it's been short notice. I didn't realise, actually, listened to one of the French pundits yesterday on Amazon Prime, was talking about that initially Japan was going to be part of it, and then
they were
asked into it last minute. So for teams just to be able to pull that together is so impressive. And considering teams like Georgia in particular, like the guy mentioned, players are all over the place in France, playing in other countries, and you've got to pull them together for this tournament. And
it's not their fault that Fiji turned out to have the COVID problem, because had Fiji played all their games, there would have undoubtedly been more tries and more entertainment. So that would have lifted the whole thing. They didn't know about the selection process that Fabien Galtier was going to do, which the club said he broke the understanding, the agreement that they'd made there. So whatever. And it's interesting because, as I say, people are dishonest when they their views of this. On the one hand, they say entertain me. On the other hand, they say don't lose. They really do. And so, what if they'd all gone out there and played around? What if the games had been 60-58? People would have then said, "Oh, it's just basketball, silly." I think the best thing is to say, public rugby opinion, as exhibited certainly on social media, should just be ignored, frankly.
Do you know, we're just lucky we had rugby played. I'm happy we had rugby played. That we had some good rugby, especially in that final. End of the day, people worked hard to get that tournament going, and we had it. So I can't complain. It's really hard for any tournament to be embedded. Six Nations has taken many years for that to be like, one of our main figurehead tournaments in the Northern Hemisphere. So for a tournament just to be created short notice. And
another point as well is, those games played at a full Millennium Stadium with the atmosphere, they would have carried the boring bits, because the atmosphere is there, the players and so on. So it makes up for it. When you're viewing it in an empty stadium, you can't possibly compare. But I tell you what it does do, it makes you look at the product itself and say, is this good enough? Does it exist as an exciting thing without all the other things? Because at times it doesn't. And there are things they can do and should do, about it, that they can do simply. So it's
totally agree. No, I totally agree. There's times when you're watching the games, and because there's no crowd or fans, you sort of go, well, it just looks like a training match, and it looks quite not thrilling, not entertaining. But you're right, you whack a bunch of crowd there. Like yesterday, I know it was only 2,000 people, it added another element to the atmosphere, and all of a sudden the game was entertaining itself, but you found it was more entertaining to watch because there were people in the stands.
Full Contact, in association with Mitsubishi Motors. Everyone's ambitions are different. You can climb to the top, or you could take on uphill battles of a different kind. You can explore for hundreds of miles, or you could begin a bigger journey. You can make time fly, or you could make it stand still. The Mitsubishi SUV range. Drive your ambition.
Well, if you're a regular subscriber to this podcast, you will know that in partnership with England Rugby, Mitsubishi Motors runs a volunteer recognition programme to provide the rugby community with opportunities to recognise and reward the volunteers who are the heartbeat of the game. Throughout the autumn, in association with Mitsubishi, I have been chatting with a selection of rugby volunteers to hear their stories and to shine a light on the brilliant work they've been doing in these most challenging of times. My guest for the 7th instalment is Sunday Times Grassroots Sportswoman of the Year, Zainab Almeida. Zainab, hi.
Hi, Brian.
Lau, you founded the Studs in the Mud project. How, why, when, and what? What is it?
How in 2019, so last year, it's a project looking at getting rugby to different parts of basically countries that rugby is not necessarily popular in. It's about using the rugby values to change people's life for the better, and mainly due to it's to empower women and children, inspire children as well.
I hear you also created Muslima Rugby.
That's
for
it,
Muslim women in rugby. What were the purpose and the mission of this project? And was it inspired by your own experiences? And if so, which particular point?
Yes, it was inspired by my own experience. Generally being a black Muslim woman in the rugby scene, didn't see many people like me. And Muslim rugby is to try and not let anyone feel the way I did when I started playing rugby. So it's about networking Muslim women that play rugby, inspiring each other, sharing experiences.
How did you feel?
I felt really isolated. I felt like I didn't fit in the rugby community. I was really often thinking, where are people that look like me? Is this sport for me? That's a lot of the things that kept playing on my mind.
I mean, one of the things that would stand out, obviously, the dress sense. Any problem with that now?
Oh, not at all. Not at all. I wear sports hijab to play, and I fasten a scrum cap on top just in case it falls off. Because being called bulldozer, I really do like to get into the game, so I don't have to worry about that when I've got my scrum cap on top. But it doesn't play only in sevens though, when it's really hot and covered up. That's the only thing. But I don't play sevens much, so that's not too much of a problem.
Why do you think it's so important to make rugby more accessible to women, more diverse? And what do you think the biggest challenges are when you're trying to do that?
I think the reason why it's so important, I think it's about growth of the game, essentially, getting people from different backgrounds and different cultures to play rugby. Ultimately, you're going to have a bigger talent pool to choose from, and just rugby and its values is just so important, and to give that to everyone across the board, regardless of religion, ethnic minority and backgrounds. I think it's very important to grow it that way. In terms of challenges, I think a lot of the times is stereotypes. A lot of people potentially feel that, I mean, for me, being a Muslim, I'm not allowed to play sports. Why am I? I should be in the kitchen or having babies and stuff. But I think if you're able to give rugby to somebody from underrepresented group, it can do so much wonders. And ultimately, I think representation is very important. People, if they can see it, they can be it. So wherever background you come from, if you see someone that looks like you, ultimately you can relate to them and feel like, do you know what, if they can do it, I can do it too.
Being a mother and an NHS worker,
yes,
you've been very busy. How has it, how has that helped in your volunteer work?
Yeah. It does help a lot. I think with me having so many hats to myself, being a mother and all that kind of stuff, rugby helps for me to balance the others out. So it's my stress reliever, something I go to when I'm stressed, and something that I need to help me with all the motherhood stuff and working in NHS and being busy. My projects, I feel like it gives me a sense of purpose as well. So I know that by following my passion and getting more people inspired through my project and getting them to join rugby, ultimately I'm hopefully changing their lives, but through rugby. So it gives me that sense, it gives me drive, it gives me that sense of purpose.
Look, you talked about the benefits for being and profile and so on. What immediate measures, and I would bear in mind that rugby hasn't got a lot of money at the moment, what would you like to see the initiatives from the RFU or indeed anyone else to help the women's game, the BAMA game?
I think, so I'm part of a advisory board from Girls Rugby Club that Rachel Burford founded, and we talk a lot about these kind of stuff. And I think even from the little things like the Grassroots Club, allowing women to play in the best pitches that they have, just like the men's do. Yeah. Having us not being an afterthought, but actually being part of the initial thoughts. Whenever you want to do anything in the club, you're talking about the men's, you're talking about women's as well. We don't want to be the afterthought. Mm-hmm. Primetime TV, I know BBC, recently we managed to get some airtime, the women's game, but we want more of that. That would be absolutely amazing, because that's when the young girls looking and watching, someone that never even played rugby before, they're looking and be like, wow, look at this amazing team. I could do it too. So I think primetime TV, making sure we're not an afterthought, and I think all these amazing initiatives hopefully will help grow the game.
Deb, can I just say, great congratulations on winning the Sunday Times Vitality Grassroots Sportswoman of the Year award. It's been great to talk to you. Your enthusiasm and passion have been, it comes across. I hope you understand that you do have that charisma about you, and it's a good thing. What does the award mean to you? The recognition for the award as well. Yeah,
it means a lot. And I was nominated actually by my teammate Sarah Bosworth from Barnes Rugby Club, and it means a lot. I do what I do. I play rugby because I love it. It's my passion, and to be recognised for just doing what I love, it's amazing. And the accolade is it's amazing. Sunday Times, Vitality, and what I really want from this, if I'm honest, for my project to be sustainable, for me to be able to bring rugby to different parts of the world, to really grow the women's game, and to be positive advocate for women and children, especially of ethnic minorities, for the game. And hopefully this accolade will help me to reach that goal. And also, I don't know if you've heard, Brian, I want to, this is my vision, right? To sit down with a cup of Earl Grey, watching the women's game and see a Muslim woman representing England. Yep. And I want that to happen one day. For more details about the Mitsubishi Motors Volunteer Recognition Programme with England Rugby, visit www.englandrugby.com/participation/volunteers/. Maggie, England women have had a year to remember, heading to the World Cup ranked number one, not necessarily favourites maybe. Are they favourites, or is it home advantage?
I think they're definitely up there as favourites. New Zealand playing the Rugby World Cup, which has never been played in their country before. Definitely going to be considered as one of the favourites as well. And the whole of New Zealand are literally in support of this tournament coming to the country. I think it's going to be a tough challenge for England to go out there and to get that World Cup win. But knowing England, they've beaten New Zealand before in New Zealand. So I think it's going to be a tournament that should hopefully be heavily competitive. But I generally sort of believe it's probably going to be an England-New Zealand final. And the way England are looking at the moment, they look incredibly confident. They've had a good year. I know it's difficult because of the circumstances this year, preparation and so on, to see them sides compared. And also, they don't play each other that often. You're so right. So usually what normally happens before a Rugby World Cup, England and New Zealand tend to play each other a few times. So England might either go out to New Zealand to play them a few times to establish where they're currently at, or New Zealand might come over to here to play. But that obviously hasn't happened, and it isn't going to happen because of the COVID circumstances. So England's sort of have not had a chance to retest themselves against New Zealand. And also many of those players in the England team, some of them are still quite young. Some of them have never played New Zealand, or if they have played New Zealand, they've only lost. So that's going to be quite interesting. Will that affect the way England's mentality is going into a World Cup in New Zealand against potentially they could meet the best team one of the best teams in the world. So I think it does affect preparation, but knowing England, they'll do everything they possibly can to make sure they're ready for that tournament. England have also got France in their pool. I assume before the World Cup, England wanted to play France a few times, but now that they're in their pool, that probably might not happen as much. So who will England use to be their team to sort of prepare themselves with? They'll probably end up doing what you just said there, possible versus probables, and test each other a lot in camp. We'll do some questions now. One from Clampy. Some games are absolute belters, clubs internationals, others are kick tennis, scrum resets, yet they're the same laws. So if the fault is not just with the laws, what needs to be done to get a more entertainment more often? The best way to answer that, it's really hard to answer that question. I want it in a succinct, short answer. Every game is different. I think there's no way to really improve the entertainment a game other than really changing some rules. And I just think every team plays they want to play in terms of getting advantage. So I probably can't answer that question in the most succinct way. All I can say is entertainment is subjective.
All right, very quickly. The things they can do really easily. They can stop allowing scrum halves 30 seconds to get it to the back of a ruck in the ideal position. Use it, count down the 5 loud. If they don't use it, that's it. It's a scrum, turn the ball over. That cuts it down. Don't allow conferences on the way to lineouts. Don't allow conferences before scrums. If you wanted to, you could just referee this. And the reason I say you shouldn't referee it is because they come under pressure to do things and then they resile from it. If you had a stop clock, like in American football, you've got to snap the ball within 30 seconds from the clock going on. And if you don't, you get marched back 5 yards. If you're not, the ball goes out. If you're not there, out with an injury or whatever. If you're not there and it's not in within 30 seconds or whatever you agree, then you lose the putting or the throw. I tell you what, they'll be there like a shot. The reason they don't do it, and the reason why you can't I don't think it's the right thing to take the time off for reset scrums, is they'll just take more time. Because they think, well, it's not being taken off the actual time, so what does it matter if this takes 5 minutes? You're going to see 80 minutes play. No, well, actually you will do, but it'll be over 2 hours, which we don't want. So small things like that don't require law changes. You've got to be very careful with law changes because they have unintended consequences. But simply, very simple things like that, and you'd be amazed how quickly it goes. This is not meant, in my day it was better, because there were more mistakes, the standard wasn't as good, etc., etc. It wasn't as fast. But I tell you what, the game flowed better because of restarts. Every time it was dropped, it came back into play within 40 seconds. It didn't take 2.5 minutes to come back in. Yeah. So the rhythm was different. So when people watch it, it actually seems to flow more. Superficially, it seems, this is better product. It's not actually, but it does flow better. And we're getting staccato thing.
I just think you can't muck about with rules too much. If there's anything, you probably do change the pointing systems or reduce the amount of people you bring off the bench. Just because I think the minute you start changing rules, all of a sudden there's consequences. And then I might have a game like NFL, which I'd absolutely love, but you're right, it does last about 2 hours sometimes when you stop the clock on certain occasions.
All these questions require a thesis. So I'll just take one more then. Do you think the Sarries contingent will get enough competitive games in the Championship to keep them sharp for international duty?
Do you know what? I actually think Saracens players will have the opportunity to look after their bodies. I mean, next year we've got the Lions, which is going to be absolutely crucial for players to put themselves in the shop window for that. And I think Saracens will play some Championship games, but then the reality is they'll probably put themselves they'll go into what potentially would be a difficult Lions tour, probably in a good place, being fit and healthy and ready to go. So I think some players will be envious of their opportunity that some of the Saracens players will get to look after their bodies.
Look, I would have said at one point this was a problem, but now that they have the camps that precede tournaments and the solid work that they are allowed to do there over a prolonged period of time, and having been down to England camps and seeing how hard they work, I think that's less of a problem than it used to be, where people were ticking over. It used to take them a couple of games to get up to speed. Because if they are not sharp when they get into camp, they'll either not be picked or they will get sharp. And you're talking about players who have shown they can do it anyway. So it'll just be a question of that element of focus. Is it there, isn't it? If it's not, well, sorry, you're not there, but we know you can be there. So actually, let's sort it out and make sure you are. Well, that's all we have time for this week on Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph. Huge thank you today to my co-host Maggie Alphonshi and to all our guests. If you enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe and check out some of our previous episodes. And to stay updated on all things sport, head to telegraph.co.uk/contact, where listeners can get 30 days access to all the Telegraph's premium sports coverage completely free. But for now, it's goodbye.
Full Contact, in association with Mitsubishi Motors. Drive your ambition.